Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's lesson, which is on establishing a family communications plan. My name is Parker Twiss. I'm currently the Emergency Planning Specialist in Health Strategies, and so I'll be presenting this lesson for you this week. So the objectives of this lesson are fairly straightforward. First off, we'll learn both what a family communication plan is, as well as learning why having a plan is important in a general sense. We'll then move on into understanding when a plan would be useful, both in small-scale and large-scale disasters, as well as in times when there isn't a natural disaster, it's just day-to-day. And finally, we'll identify the components that make up a successful family communications plan. So first off, what exactly is a family communications plan? So in its simplest form, a family communications plan is a way to stay in contact with each other during a crisis. Or if you're not in direct contact, it provides a common way to meet through either a in-town or out-of-town contact or a local meeting place. A plan involves a few key components. The first is establishing a local meeting place, followed by an emergency contact who's both in town as well as someone who is out of town, or ideally out of state. The final component is having physical copies of numbers and addresses in ideally everyone's wallets or backpacks, such as with a laminated card or having a copy in another safe place. We'll discuss each of these in depth in the following slides. So now that we know what a family communications plan is and the various components that are involved with it, why is having this plan important? First, we'll examine a widely known disaster, which is Hurricane Katrina. So during Hurricane Katrina, evacuations were completely chaotic. Individuals were helicoptered off of roofs and they were taken to completely different shelters than their family members. And due to both cell phone networks being down and be it overloaded or destroyed, as well as phones running out of battery, they had no way to contact each other. So during a survey conducted of individuals registered with the Red Cross, they identified a general but probably low estimate of how many people were separated from in the disaster, and this was out of about a pool of 420,000 or so, and the survey included about 1,500 individuals. Half of those surveyed said that during and after the disaster, they had been separated from their families for at least an entire day. About a fifth of those, 22%, and extrapolated to overall victims, that's estimated to be over 100,000 people, said that after 6 weeks, they were still separated from their family members. A full third, which is projected to be over 150,000 people, said that their home or apartment was destroyed. So this means they didn't even have a place to go back to if they were trying to meet up with their family members. So what can we learn from Katrina for a family communications plan? Ultimately, this disaster showcases why having a communications plan is essential. While Utah isn't going to experience any hurricanes, to my knowledge, an earthquake is the most likely widespread crisis. An earthquake can destroy infrastructure in a similar manner to a hurricane. In a disaster, the situation is chaotic. A communications plan reduces the chance of being separated from family members for a long period of time. Nobody wants to be separated for 6 weeks, especially during a disaster zone. Having a meeting place and out-of-state contacts allows a point of commonality even if the current area is a mess. It allows an area of checking in. So even if you aren't checking in face-to-face, you at least know that everyone's okay. It comes down to that communications can and often will break down during a disaster. So we've discussed why having a family communications plan is useful in a massive disaster, but now we'll briefly touch on why it's important to have in a general, more day-to-day sense, as well as on a smaller scale. So while a family communications plan may appear a bit obvious in a massive disaster such as a hurricane or an earthquake, a plan can be useful even in smaller, more likely instances. The purpose of the plan is ultimately let you stay in contact with your family members if you're separated for whatever reason. That doesn't always have to be a disaster. A crisis, big or small, heightens the importance of communication. As part of the plan, having an out-of-state contact can allow communication with family even if current cell towers are overloaded. Something that most people don't realize is that this overload can occur even without a natural disaster occurring. And an example of that is the 4th of July celebration in Idaho Falls. So an example of where communications became impaired due to a cell tower overload was on the 4th of July celebration in Idaho Falls I was attending many years back. So there's a fantastic fireworks show, which I highly recommend everyone going to. But in this case, there was an incident where some people decided it was a good idea to try and go swimming in between the launch platform for the fireworks and the spectating area with all the visitors. And the river in that area is fairly large and it's fairly fast moving and deceptively cold. So they needed some rescue, But unfortunately, due to the thousands upon thousands of people who were attending, the local cell service was completely overwhelmed and the towers were overloaded, and that ultimately impaired the rescue response. They were asking us to stay off our various devices to allow the bandwidth for the rescuers. There wasn't really a natural disaster in this case. There were just a lot of people attending a celebration. Yet communicating by cell phone either didn't work at all or it was extremely slow, and that included texting. And that alone caused a miniature crisis in addition to an existing incident. And that was completely outside of a natural disaster. So now that we've explained of how a family communications plan can be useful in both a natural disaster as well as during perhaps just a large celebration, move on to the first part of the actual plan, which is establishing a local meeting place for you and your family. Establishing an agreed meeting place doesn't have to be a complicated process. Ideally, you'll establish two separate locations. The first can be as simple as your mailbox or the end of the street sign. The second location should be meant to be a meeting place in case the house or neighborhood is unsafe, such as in the natural disaster of Katrina, or if you can't reach it, like you're at a large celebration, like in Idaho Falls on the 4th of July. Having a simple designated location is key in case communication is impossible for whatever reason, and the location doesn't have to be complicated, just recognizable. It should exist for any reason that you have to leave your home in case of an emergency, be it for a house fire or just you're out and about and something happens. There's a handout from ready.gov that provides additional guidance and ideas for additional places to meet both indoors, outdoors, and at a local and neighborhood level. And that link will be provided at the end of the lesson, but the QR code for that is also put up here on the screen. The next part of the family communications plan is to establish some emergency contacts. This first one should be an emergency contact who's in town and local to your area. Since most crises are minor, communications will generally remain intact. The in-town contact should be able to be reached during a minor or major crisis, so it should be someone who you trust, especially if you have younger children, someone who they know and are comfortable with, who can help in case of an emergency. Having a contact who can be reached via cell phone and text can allow a simple way to locate any family members if you're separated for any reason, such as at the previously mentioned large celebration. You can have a check-in every now and again if the cell phones are overloaded. Everyone's cell phone should definitely have this contact clearly designated, such as in case of emergency, call this number, and then in parentheses, local contact. You want to make it nice and simple so that in an emergency, you don't have to be frantically scrolling through your contacts trying to remember who was the local contact. Building on that, the next portion is to establish an out-of-town and preferably out-of-state contact. During a disaster, the local area will be chaotic at best. Local resources will likely be overwhelmed, and your local contact might not be reachable for whatever reason. In a widespread disaster, as in the case of Katrina, local networks will likely be either overloaded or completely destroyed. So having an out-of-state contact is essential because they will likely still be reachable via phone or via text message, since there's no network overload in that area. Having an out-of-state contact lets multiple family members check in with them, and then they let you know. So even if you're nowhere near each other in a disaster zone, it provides a nexus point of communications to allow everyone to check in and make sure everyone's okay. As with your local contact, it's essential to add this one to your phone with an obvious title so you don't have to scroll through a bunch of options to immediately call and check in. The next component of a family communications plan is to have physical copies of both numbers and addresses, if that's applicable for your situation. It's key to have a physical copy of your plan. This allows you to use a friend's phone, for example, if you can't remember your local or out-of-state contact. Outlining your meeting places as well lets you have one less thing to think about during a crisis. An option would be to have a small laminated card with contact info and the written meeting places that can be placed in everyone's wallet, or if you have younger children, it can be placed in their backpack. This is a good way to ensure that information isn't lost if someone's phone is misplaced or just plain run out of batteries, which is something that happens day to day anyway. Another location for a copy of this plan could be with your other important documents at home, such as in a fireproof safe or box. The overall purpose is to provide a physical medium to portray the addresses and phone numbers in case you either can't remember or your digital methods of usually easily contacting them are lost. The next portion is going to be of why practicing this plan is important. Practicing makes perfect, and that adage holds true, especially for emergency plans. So practicing your plan is essential to make sure that any wrinkles are ironed out well before you actually have to use it. The first time you go through your plan should not be during a crisis. You want to have practiced it multiple times before that so you don't have to think of things up on the fly. If possible, and especially if you have younger members of your family, consider making it a game. to maintain their interest and remove a bit of that anxiety for establishing a local meeting place and who to call in case of an emergency. Adding on to that is to perhaps have a checklist to go through and make sure that there's all parts of your plan which are included to make sure nothing was missed and that you would only realize that through a practice run. So practice both meeting up both at your designated meeting places and also checking in with your emergency contacts regularly every 6 to 12 months or so. That makes sure that cell phone numbers remain the same and that your meeting place hasn't changed, such as if a favorite tree was cut down or something else where it would make the landscape unrecognizable. So you'll want to practice both of those regularly and make sure that everything is set in case you actually have to enact your plan. So some additional tips and information that can help establish your family communication plan includes if you can't complete a call in emergency, try texting. It has a higher chance of getting through a congested network due to the lower amount of data used. Depending on the situation, consider adding walkie-talkies to your emergency kits. If everyone works and generally operates close to home, those could come in handy during an emergency and they're available for relatively cheap. For extremely long-range communications with both family and friends and other individuals, ham radio allows communicating across massive distances and can also be an interesting hobby. Some final information are some Ready.gov and Habitat for Humanity resources. They have some fantastic checklists for creating a family communications plan linked here. You can use that QR code as well to go to Ready.gov for their various downloadable resources that provide a nice outline for going through your plan. And that concludes this lesson. For any questions, please feel free to email roadmap@brhd.org. Hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their day.